Hey everybody, welcome back to Movies You Missed Podcast, episode 114. The episode brought to you by our fathers. Since Father's Day was just this Sunday, we are jumping into movies chosen by our fathers, similar to just a few episodes ago, where our mothers chose the movies that we discussed. Very excited about this episode because, Vee, I had not seen your father's pick, not your pick, even though I'm sure you would have picked this movie at one point or another. But before we get into that, Vee, how are you today?
So stoked for the excuse to introduce you to another Western.
I figured as much when I was watching it, yes. I only texted you one thing, and I figured it would make you laugh because it made me laugh when I finally realized what was going on and who was on the screen. So I can't wait to get into that moment.
Definitely made me laugh as well. And just remember, when you critique this movie, this came from my father, so I'm going to be a little bit more defensive than normal, so you better be careful.
Yes, we'll see what I thought about it, Mr. McClure. So thank you for introducing me to this film, which I had never seen, another Western, which our listeners know. And Mr. McClure, I'm sure you know that Westerns are the least watched genre of myself. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy them, so we'll see what happens. But before we get into those, and before we get into the movies that we've seen in theaters or on streaming this week, for those of you that are new to Movies You Missed Podcast, welcome. We are John and Vee, friends for over 25 years, spent collectively 25 years in the entertainment industry. We are here to discuss movies that have flown under the radar, movies that need to be revisited, and movies that we just absolutely love. And our favorite thing, well, one of our many favorite things about the podcast that Vee and I do together is there are no spoilers here at Movies You Missed Podcast.
That's right, no spoilers in over 2 years, and it's also one of my favorite things about it, too.
Yeah. So before we jump into these films that our fathers have chosen for the Father's Day episode, Vee, we love going to the movies, so I'm curious, what did you see, if anything, new this week in the theaters or on streaming?
I went to the June edition of Cinemark's Secret Movie Monday this last week. Well, actually, just a couple days ago. And they were showing Jeff Nichols' The Bike Riders.
Oh, and how was that?
Well, it stars Tom Hardy, Austin Butler, who played Elvis, and also Jodie Comer from Killing Eve. So the cast, beyond the fact that it's about motorcycles, really got my attention when the previews started coming out for this movie. And I was really excited to see it. And I cannot believe someone could make a story about an outlaw motorcycle gang boring.
Oh, no.
I was so disappointed, and it really comes down to the editing. The costumes were amazing. It was complete period authentic. All of the cars, everything that they were doing, it definitely felt like the 60s. The music was right with it, too. All of the performances from these greats, of course. Michael Shannon's in it, too. There's a bunch of great actors in this movie, yeah. And it only came down to the editing, and what the problem was is that Jodie Comer is being interviewed at a later date to talk about all the events that happen in this movie, which is fine, and we've encountered movies in that format before, totally okay, but instead of kind of bookending it where, you know, the movie starts with her talking and being interviewed, and then the movie ends with her talking and being interviewed and wrapping the story up, it just kept flashing back and forth to her and the story. And so it was very meandering and also jarring, and there wasn't any emotional buildup or tension or anything like that. And so you never could figure out what this movie was trying to tell you or what the purpose of it was. And it just left you feeling like you don't really care.
Oh, wow. Well, that's too bad. I saw the trailer and I didn't care.
It was about a motorcycle club in the 60s. It sounded so cool to me, of course, with my motorcycle background, and I was so disappointed. And I was driving home, and at first I was like, well, it's not that great, so I'll put it in the movies you could miss. And then thinking about it right before we started recording, I can't think of anyone I'd actually recommend it to.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's why it's going to be on my movies you should miss list of the year, unfortunately.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen the trailer 2 or 3 times over the last, I would say, like 6 or 7 months, and none of it was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go see that one. There was nothing drawing me to that movie at all.
Again, all the actors did a great job. The costumes were great. It really was just screwed up in post-production.
That's too bad.
Which is the worst, right? Because you almost had it.
Yeah, exactly. It was there. You screwed it up.
Exactly.
That's too bad.
Yeah. So what did you see in theaters this week?
Well, I went and saw the new Disney Pixar sequel to Inside Out 2. I was very skeptical about this movie because the trailer looked terrible. And, you know, I was kind of thinking that maybe this would be another Elemental situation where the trailer was terrible and the movie ended up being spectacular. And the movie was not spectacular. The movie was very, very much... I said it on the reel, if anybody's seen that. I posted it last night, but I'd give it a 7 out of 10 only because the animation is really fantastic. Story-wise, I get it. Riley's now 13. She's going to be going into high school. She's trying to fit in, etc., etc. There were some funny moments, but it just tried a little bit too hard, in my opinion. I did not connect even remotely as deep as I did with Riley as I did the first time around. Mm-hmm. I love the first Inside Out. It is an absolute masterpiece. Makes me cry every time. This movie was an unnecessary sequel. We didn't need it at all. And I get it. Let's continue on with the story of Riley. Let's watch her grow up some more. We didn't really need to, though. The end of Inside Out ended fantastically. Let's have that ending be the, well, what if this, what if that sort of thing, in your head. Like, especially later on if you watch the movie Inside Out and you're like, well, what's going to happen with Riley? Like, make up your own conclusion with what's going to happen with Riley and her family, beyond the end of the first Inside Out. We don't need to see her trying to fit in with the older hockey league, and we don't need to see her try and, decide if she's going to still be friends with her best friends or, cold shoulder them because she wants to fit in. We know that's how teenage years go. And I just kind of felt like this was one of those, like, you know what, let's bank on it. And of course, congrats to Disney Pixar. They had the biggest opening weekend of the year so far, 6 months into 2024.
Jesus.
So congrats to them. I think they did over $155 million domestically.
Oh, I feel so bad for several movies that we loved so far this year.
Yeah, I know. But I'm going to say right now, I was the only one laughing out loud in the theater. There were no parents laughing. There were no children laughing. And when I walked out of the theater, I asked a couple of kids if they enjoyed the movie, and maybe because I was just some random guy on my own being like, what'd you guys think of the movie? They were like, it was okay. I was like, shit. Like, well, too bad.
Well, it might have a big drop-off then.
It very well may have a big drop-off. Like I said, I felt it was completely unnecessary. I didn't hate my hour and a half, but I didn't love it either. And Inside Out, the first one, far superior, masterpiece. This one, wait till streaming. As much as I am an advocate of going to the theater, I even say this in the reel that I just posted last night, you can wait for at-home viewing for this one. There's nothing that's really going to change it for you if you're in the theater or not.
Do you even recommend people watching it on streaming, though? It sounds like it was worth missing.
It's a movie you could miss. I don't want to say you should miss it, because it still has some very good moments in joy and sadness.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, you and I had a couple of goose eggs this week at the theaters.
Yeah, it's been a while since that's happened.
It has. But hopefully that means we can caution our audience against seeing them if they were thinking about it.
Yeah. Again, and it's so interesting. Like, the theater was full of families, and I was the only, like, one on my own there, and I was laughing louder than anybody else or laughing other than anybody else. It was just really weird.
As per usual with the two of us, we encounter that a lot, though, right?
I guess that's kind of true. Yeah, we do. We're loud laughers.
We are. Loud and proud.
So, yeah. Mutant and proud. But, I'm always looking forward to see what happens the following week. So maybe we'll see something entertaining next week.
Yeah.
Let's jump back into the 1960s when this movie was produced. However, this movie is set far before the year 1960. Vee, your father's pick for the week. Let's jump in. What do you say?
Yeehaw! Sounds great.
All right, here we go. Take it away.
When I told both of my parents that we wanted to celebrate them during the upcoming Mother's Day and Father's Day respective holidays this year, my father over-delivered and gave me 7 different choices to choose from.
All right.
Which is awesome and completely expected because my father's favorite pastime is watching movies. Of course, that's
Wonderful.
One of the reasons why he and I are so close. And so he laid them all out on the table because he, like you, still loves physical media and collects DVDs. And several of them were actually already on my list that I wanted to cover in future episodes. So from there, I really wanted our first Father's Day special to really embody my father. And of course, for those of you who have listened to our podcast previously, you know he's a big fan of Westerns and introduced me to Westerns. And of course, every other genre out there. And so...
There you go.
So for this special Father's Day episode, I wanted to pick a Western that he suggested. We watched Shane together, which was one of his picks, but unfortunately I didn't enjoy myself as much the second time watching it as I did when he introduced me to it many, many years ago.
Oh.
And so I went with his other Western suggestion, which is a fantastic movie. I've loved it since he introduced me to it back when I was a kid. I've seen it repeatedly over the years since that time, and I think it has a phenomenal cast. It's a lot of fun. Of course, it has a legendary score, and I was really excited to introduce this movie to John. So this is 1960's The Magnificent Seven.
Oh, yeah.
A great cast full of legendary movie stars as well that I will get into in a little bit. But first, The Magnificent Seven is actually based on The Seven Samurai, a world-renowned Japanese movie by Akira Kurosawa that actually Quentin Tarantino loves and has spawned many adaptations, and this was the first one.
Wow, I did not know that this was a retelling of Seven Samurai. I was gifted the Criterion collection of Seven Samurai about 5 years ago by my buddy Derek, and I still have not watched it yet.
Oh, bummer. I bet the Criterion edition of it is fantastic.
I can only imagine.
And for any of you who subjected yourselves to Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's new Netflix disaster, that also stole just about everything from Seven Samurai.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But this American version from 1960 is actually very good, and it's a good twist on it, putting it in a Western setting instead. And it's led by Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, and of course our fan favorite Eli Wallach.
Yes.
So for any of you who have not seen either The Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai, this is about a small village in Mexico being abused and exploited by a group of bandits led by a man named Calvera. And these poor villagers, of course, they're farmers. They don't have the means to defend themselves, but they say since this is their village, their families, their crops, they're going to do whatever they need to make this group of bandits basically move on. And so they cross the border and go into a southern Texas town to try to find guns. They just want to buy guns and take care of it themselves. And they actually end up meeting a man named Chris because the first time we're introduced to this man, played by Yul Brynner, there's an argument between a man passing through town and the local undertaker.
Yeah.
This man said, hey, this townsperson died in front of me and nobody paid attention and nobody did anything about it, so I'm going to do the honorable thing and I'll just pay for his funeral. And the undertaker's like, look, your money's good. I've built the coffin. I can get him up to Boot Hill. But unfortunately, because he's an Indian, nobody in town is going to let me bury him there.
Right.
And there's this argument that proceeds for a minute or so. And finally, Chris, who's been watching, says, you know what? I'll drive that hearse up to Boot Hill and I'll take care of this.
Well, I'll be damned. I never knew you had to be anything but a corpse to get into Boot Hill. How long's this been going on?
Since the town got civilized. Oh, it's not my doing, boys. I don't like it. No, sir. I've always treated every man the same, just as another future customer.
Well, in that case, get that hearse rolling.
I can't. My driver's quit.
He's prejudiced too, huh?
Well, when it comes to a chance of getting his head blown off, he's downright bigoted.
Well, get somebody else.
There isn't anybody else who'll drive it. So here.
Oh, hell. If that's all that's holding things up, I'll drive the rig.
Can I borrow that scattergun?
No. You're more than welcome. Hey, now wait a minute there. Listen, this hearse cost me $840 in Denver. It's the only one in the county. I'll be darned if I'm going to turn it over to strangers to be shot at.
I'll pay for the damages. I want to see this.
Me too.
And then a guy named Vin shows up and says, I'm going to help you. Screw these townspeople and their casual racism. Let's go take care of this.
Yeah.
And that starts this friendship between these two men who, I wouldn't call them gunfighters per se. Instead, I would call them guns for hire.
I would say gun for hire is definitely the term that I kind of gathered from watching the movie.
Yeah, a 20th century term would probably be called like a bouncer or someone in security, right?
Yes, definitely.
And also, these Mexicans from this small village watch this whole entire scene go down, and they approach Chris and say, hey, this man Calvera comes at the end of every harvest and steals most of our food, and we're completely poor and can't really pay you much, but we really need someone to teach us how to use guns. And Chris instead says, no, what you need to hire is a man who has a gun. And men are actually cheaper than guns at this point. So Chris proceeds to start recruiting some men for this job, and a lot of them scoff at it because these are poor village folk and farmers, and they don't have a ton of money to hire these men. But most of them, it seems, have a bunch of empathy for these poor people and really think it's a shitty situation that, this man and his crew are bullying all of them. And so even though it's only $20 for 6 weeks of work and all the food you can eat, which, by the way, that would have convinced me to take the job. If someone's going to feed me for free, I'm in.
Oh, yeah. And the food looked pretty damn good.
It did. So now he's recruited 6 other men, and so there's now 7 of them, and that seems to be enough, and so they travel across the border and go into this town. And not only do they start shoring up a lot of defenses, but they also start teaching the men how to use guns. And what precedes is this epic story about this small town standing up for themselves, and the men who have chosen to help protect it. And each one of these men have a very different personality. The characters are very distinctive in this movie, which is one of the things I really love about it. Mm-hmm. And of course, I always love stories about the little guy. It's a cool Western with a lot of great action and gunplay, which of course makes it a lot of fun to watch too. It's got a great score, and I've just loved this movie since I was a kid, and really hope you did too.
I enjoyed the movie. I felt it could have been about 15 minutes shorter. It was like 2 hours, 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Cinematography was beautiful. I've heard the soundtrack before. Mm-hmm. It showed up in Hardcore Henry very early on in this podcast. So when I heard it, I was like, for a good 5 minutes, I'm like, I've heard this. And I know that somebody gets on a horse and then they fall off a horse. And then I was like, oh, it was Hardcore fucking Henry. And
it was also used in a bunch of Marlboro commercials for years afterwards.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah.
I remember the Marlboro commercials. Oh my gosh. It's crazy how there's literally no cigarette commercials anymore.
Thank God.
Yeah. There might have been some smoking in this movie, but it wasn't so dominating, like how other Westerns are, like John Wayne Westerns, where he's literally smoking every 5 minutes. But anyway, going back to the movie, I really liked the introduction of Chris and Vin, how they wanted to bury this guy, and then that whole gun battle that kind of takes place up at the cemetery. I thought that was pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of very comical dialogue in this movie, which I also liked. But I got to tell you, my favorite scene of the whole movie is when Bernardo O'Reilly, played by Charles Bronson, is with these 3 children from the village, and these kids start telling him about how they've decided to take it upon themselves to honor him when he dies and bury him, in a proper burial and all this stuff. And the dialogue between them was so snappy and so witty and smart that I really, really liked that scene a lot. The gun battle stuff was also pretty badass. I really liked all of that. Eli Wallach, I texted you. It was like, I finally recognized Eli Wallach because I saw his name come up in the opening credits, because this is one of those movies where the opening credits are in the literal beginning of the movie and you don't have any end title sequences except for the end. And it was hilarious to see Eli Wallach as a young man in the 60s, because he was in my pick very early on in this podcast for our first section of Christmas movies for the holiday. I'd only ever seen him as an old man. And, it's kind of funny going back to Lawrence of Arabia, how Alec Guinness he's playing a Saudi Arabian, and now Eli Wallach, very clearly a white man, is playing a Mexican marauder, basically.
Yeah.
And
he's a Jewish man who was born in New York.
Yeah, and he's playing a Mexican character with the whole accent and everything. He shows up in the village at the beginning of the movie, starts slapping around the guy. He's got his version of a Mexican accent. But overall, I would give the movie like a strong 7.5 out of 10.
Nice.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, soundtrack was great, cinematography was great, cast was great. Yul Brynner is in the 10 Commandments. He plays Ramesses. So I'm sitting here, and about an hour into the movie, I'm like, okay, he and Charlton Heston were in the fucking 10 Commandments together, which I'm a major lover of the 10 Commandments. So overall, again, enjoyable movie. However, I probably will never watch it again.
Because it's not really a genre up your alley, not because you didn't like it.
Exactly. Yeah,
Perfect.
and it
No
just
problem.
feels weird to say that, and
No,
nothing
not at all.
against the genre of westerns, because I do love Tombstone, I love Unforgiven. I think there was also a pacing issue for me, and granted, it's from the 60s. Again, no big deal. It's over 2 hours. No big deal. And I hate to come off as like I just hate westerns. That's not me. I'm coming around to them.
Yes.
And again, this is a classic Western film. I've only ever heard good things about it, and I completely agree with literally just about anything that's ever been said about The Magnificent Seven from the 1960s. Awesome movie. I don't think it's going to be like, you know what, it's a Magnificent Seven day, and I'm going to watch it again.
Yeah, which is fair. And I feel the same way about certain films as well. You know, we always have those films that we watch, we're like, wow, that was really good. Probably won't ever watch it again just because I'm not in the habit of gravitating toward that film or that type of film or what have you. Like, but you enjoyed it, and just because you won't ever watch a movie again doesn't mean you didn't like it.
No, exactly. Yeah, and maybe I will. I guess the door's open for me to possibly migrate back to it again because it's just such a weird genre for me. It just was a genre I never grew up with.
Exactly.
And I feel like if, I have the John Wayne collection on DVD only because my grandfather loved John Wayne movies. I like A Quiet Man, and that's kind of it in the John Wayne movie realm. I've never really seen any more of his Westerns, especially the black and whites. Yeah, it still was a very good movie. I'm very grateful to have seen it. I'm glad that I can now say that I've seen it.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to watch Seven Samurai. The fact that it's kind of a retelling of Seven Samurai is actually pretty awesome. I love Steve McQueen. I loved Yul Brynner. I thought Charles Bronson was awesome, especially not only just in that scene, but just throughout the movie. And Chico, kind of falling in love with that woman from the village. I mean, wow, I probably would have too.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy again that your father decided to choose it for this podcast. Who knows if I ever would have seen it otherwise. And, it's good to be introduced to movies and genres. Thank you, Pat, for introducing me to The Magnificent Seven, and very happy that you are now a part of the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm so happy that you were open to being introduced to this genre because, of course, I know how you aren't super familiar with it, but similar to my feelings around horror, right? And now you've made me a horror fan in 2 years.
Right, yes.
There are a couple of John Wayne movies I want to introduce you to, including one called McClintock, which is a Western comedy, which I think you'll get a kick out of. So yes, more Westerns to come. Also, I really want you to introduce me to the Ten Commandments because now I'm a big Charlton Heston fan.
Yes.
Since Ben-Hur, of course.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The Ten Commandments is on the list, most definitely.
Great. And getting back to The Magnificent Seven, as you said, the score is great. Seeing young Steve McQueen and James Coburn is a lot of fun. Steve McQueen, of course, is iconic. I was more of a Paul Newman fan just because his real personality shined through and he was just a much better dude in real life than Steve McQueen in a lot of ways. But Steve McQueen, of course, so good looking, so captivating and charming, and
oh yeah,
such a good looking guy, and he's so fun to watch in every movie he does. And James Coburn, actually, the older version of James was in Maverick, your pick from a long time ago, so that's really cool too to see him in an earlier Western.
That's actually kind of crazy that you mentioned James Coburn because I was looking at him and I was like, I've seen this guy, but I feel like he had a beard. And boom, Maverick, the Nutty Professor. I was like, that's totally James Coburn. He didn't have as deep of a voice as he did later on in life.
Right.
Like 30 years later in the 90s, where he was like this baritoned voice. And I've never seen him clean shaven.
Well, he's also the head of the Marshal Service in Eraser with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, yeah.
Good
movie.
Which is the movie I'm picking as your companion for your Arnold Schwarzenegger pick coming up.
For the sixth day?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And Steve McQueen really provides a lot of the comedic relief in this film. All of his one-liners are really great.
Oh, yeah. Very, very entertaining.
And all of those anecdotes he says about, I once knew this guy who jumped out a 5-story window and every floor he would go past, he said, well, so far so good.
Oh, I loved that. That was hysterical. That was also the cool thing about Magnificent Seven. There was a lot of laughs in those 2 hours.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. And I loved once they're all set up and waiting for Calvera to come into town, they set up all those little kids along the route. And as soon as they see Calvera and his gang, they stand up and start waving their hats. And, then the next one does it, the next one does it. And I'm sitting on the couch watching this movie and I go, the beacons are lit! Gondor calls for aid!
Awesome.
And of course, when Calvera comes to town and they have their first meeting between him and the 7 men, it's such a good scene. The back and forth between the two of them was very intense, very menacing, and it's that quiet threatening that's just keeps you on the edge of your seat. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I should have guessed. When my men didn't come back, I should have guessed. How many of you did they hire?
Enough.
New wall.
There are lots of new walls. All around.
They won't keep me out.
They're built to keep you in.
And we've mentioned Yul Brynner a couple times so far. He's not a household name like Steve McQueen is to this day in the 21st century, I think, but he is still a legendary actor in a lot of ways, and I think he was a great actor too. And because he grew up in Europe, he actually is Russian descendant, and he went to school in France, and so that's why he had this unidentifiable accent and seemed very mysterious in whatever role he played in Hollywood. That also made him very adaptable. Of course, it's the 60s, as we've said, like Eli Wallach, who's a Jewish man, was cast in a role as a Mexican. So Hollywood really used that to their advantage with Yul Brynner, especially because not only was he in, like you said, the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston playing King Ramses, but also he was in The King and I.
That's right, yes.
Have you seen that film?
I have seen it one time when Amy first moved in and we found the soundtrack at Amoeba. We ended up going down to the VHS section and found it on VHS and watched it one time.
Okay. It's a musical. It's fantastic. He actually was cast in the Broadway version first.
Oh, cool.
And got a ton of positive reviews. From there, once they decided to adapt it into a movie, they brought him into the movie version as well.
Oh, very cool. And then there was a real travesty one with Jodie Foster in the 90s.
I watched it because I loved the original King and I, and God, that remake was awful. With Chow Yun-fat. Oh, God, it was so bad.
Nothing against Jodie Foster or Chow Yun-fat,
no,
but it was not good.
As everyone knows, we love Jodie Foster on this show, but no, it was not good. And the original with Yul Brynner also stars Deborah Kerr, who's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yul Brynner's also in the original Westworld.
Oh, very cool.
Yes, because...
That Michael Crichton written in and directed.
That's right, yeah. And so for anyone who's ever watched the HBO series, it actually was adapted from the original movie.
Which I have never seen. A lot of people seem to like the original.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the original either. Steve McQueen is going to be in future picks of ours. Funny enough, he was also in a pick of my father's that I could have chosen because my father suggested Bullet as well, which of course is going to be on this list. Now, a perfect pairing for that movie would probably be Ronin, but unfortunately, both those movies are my picks, so I don't know what I'm going to pair it with in the future.
That is unfortunate, but I'm sure I can find something to go with either one of those movies.
Anything with a good car chase. Steve McQueen.
Bad Boys 2.
You know, I wouldn't protest against that because that is a pretty badass car chase in Bad Boys 2.
It really is.
Steve McQueen also is in the original Thomas Crown Affair. For those of you who've listened to some previous episodes, you know I did the remake with Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo. Steve McQueen was also in The Getaway, The Great Escape, another movie that I'm picking in the future. Steve McQueen is also in Papillon, The Towering Inferno.
Oh, yeah.
Le Mans, which is another awesome racing movie.
Oh, sweet.
The Cincinnati Kid, and one of his very first credits was in The Blob.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. As you said, Charles Bronson's in this film. He plays O'Reilly. He, of course, for any, I would say, Gen Xer, is in the Death Wish movies.
Yes.
He's also in The Great Escape and The Dirty Dozen, which has come up several times in passing in the last couple of weeks for random reasons.
Yeah, it has, actually. That's a good point. And there's a remake of Death Wish with Bruce Willis, directed by Eli Roth, which I think is pretty badass.
And funny enough, James Coburn is also in The Great Escape.
Oh, is he really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
That's probably because the man who directed this movie, John Sturgis, directed The Old Man and the Sea, Le Mans for 7 weeks before he quit.
Oh, wow.
And right after this film, he went on to direct The Great Escape and brought a bunch of these actors with him.
Well, son of a gun.
Yeah. And I'm saving the best for last. As you said, Eli Wallach is in this movie.
Yes.
Episode 35, you introduced me to The Holiday.
Yes.
He is the charming older man, Arthur, and we all fell in love with him. And it's so crazy to see him in this horrible, villainous role.
Right.
He's so mean. And he also actually plays a bad guy in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, wow.
He's a little more lovable in that movie, though, which is good. Okay. He was also in The Misfits, How the West Was Won. He was in 2 episodes of the original Batman series. He played Mr. Freeze.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I need to watch those episodes.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. I know he's been acting since like the 50s.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, he'd been acting for a really long time. And one of his later credits was actually in Mystic River. He played the liquor store owner.
No shit. Oh, wow. I don't remember him in Mystic River.
Me either, but I love that we were introduced to him as an older actor, and now we can fall in love with some of his earlier works.
Hell yeah.
And apparently even people on set loved Eli Wallach as much as us, because the actors who were hired to play his bandit gang in this movie, they adopted Eli Wallach as one of their own.
Oh, what?
Because, of course, they're in Mexico and they hired Mexican actors, even though Eli wasn't, one of them. They still fell in love with him. And in the mornings before shooting started, and after Eli was in costume, he and the group would all go riding together for an hour to warm up.
Oh, my gosh.
Members of the gang insisted on doing the final checks for his horse, all of the tack and saddle on it, and the prop gun before he was allowed to use them.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that so cute?
That's awesome.
And whenever Eli Wallach puts the gun back into his holster, I don't know if you noticed this, but if you ever watch this movie again, he looks down as he puts his gun back into his holster.
I did notice that,
And
yes.
in the DVD commentary, he said that he wasn't used to drawing a gun, and so he didn't want to look foolish by missing his holster while putting his gun back, so he looked every time he had to do it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That actually kind of adds to his character. It kind of not necessarily like takes away from his menacing attributes, but it just kind of is like, okay, this guy is trying to portray somebody that maybe he's not so much really that type of person, if that makes sense.
It does, and he actually picked out a lot of his costume. He chose the silk shirt.
Oh.
He chose to have gold teeth because he wanted to show the audience where all the money went that he stole.
Nice.
Yeah. And The Magnificent Seven was made for $2 million. I couldn't find any box office results. However, I do know that it was a complete failure in the United States. It did not do well.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But it was a massive hit in Europe and ultimately turned a profit.
Awesome.
Yeah. And although the film did not do well in the United States and received mixed reviews, Akira Kurosawa was so impressed by this remake that he sent John Sturges, the director, a ceremonial sword as a gift.
Oh, like a katana?
Yeah, exactly.
That is badass. That's like Bill giving Uma Thurman the
Exactly.
sword in Kill Bill. That's so cool.
You sold a Hattori Hanzo sword? So good.
Oh, yeah.
And though this film is a remake of Seven Samurai, there's been a couple remakes of The Magnificent Seven itself.
Yes, there has.
Not only in 2016 did they remake the film straight as a Western, as a one-to-one remake, basically, but also The Three Amigos is a parody of this film.
Is it seriously?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Because, they come into that small village thinking they were hired as musicians, and the villagers think that they're going to help them and defend their town.
My Little Buttercup. Three Amigos is hysterical.
Really funny.
And I never did see the version with Ethan Hawke and Denzel Washington, and it was directed by Antoine Fuqua.
It was, but now that you've seen the original, you can watch the remake, Magnificent Seven,
I might
too.
have to check out the remake. Yeah, it would be weird if I liked that one more.
It would be weird, although I can tell you as a remake, it's not bad.
Awesome.
It's a good
Well,
remake.
then I'll have to watch it.
Yeah. And it was Yul Brynner who actually approached the producer, Walter Mirisch, with the idea of doing a Western adaptation of Seven Samurai.
Oh, very cool.
And so because it was his idea, and he had a little bit of pull in Hollywood at this point, he had a major say in the casting decisions.
Nice.
And so Yul specifically requested that Steve McQueen be cast as Vin Tanner.
Oh, awesome.
And Steve said yes, he wanted to act in this film, but he couldn't at first because his schedule for another film called Wanted Dead or Alive would have conflicted with it. And so on a day off from filming Wanted Dead or Alive, Steve McQueen, quote, crashed his car.
Oh, God.
And was out sick.
No.
And filmed this movie, The Magnificent Seven, during his recovery.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
Total badass.
That's pretty wild.
Yes. But Yul Brynner later regretted casting Steve McQueen because they became mortal enemies on this set.
Really?
Yes. They
Whoa.
hated each other. And according to Eli Wallach's autobiography, which, by the way, we have to read,
I think so, yeah.
Yul Brynner kept thinking that Steve McQueen was trying to upstage him.
Oh.
Because Steve McQueen kept doing things that Yul Brynner thought was drawing attention to Steve and really pulling the audience's attention away from whatever Yul Brynner was saying in that scene, right? Shaking the shotgun shells and taking his hat off to check the sun in the first scene when they're driving the coffin up there.
Yeah.
That really bothered him. And just little things that Steve McQueen did to draw attention to his character really rubbed Yul Brynner the wrong way. And
wow.
so Brenner tried to upstage him by elaborately lighting his cigar during that carriage ride. And Yul Brynner was so worried about Steve McQueen upstaging him that he hired an assistant to count the number of times Steve McQueen touched his hat while Brenner was speaking.
No way.
Yeah, and Yul Brynner insisted on appearing substantially taller than Steve McQueen for every shot, to the point that he would make a little mound of dirt and stand on it whenever he had to stand next to Steve McQueen in a shot together. And
wow.
between takes, McQueen would casually kick the mound of dirt over and like flatten it out every time he passed by.
Holy shit.
Yes.
Wow. So they never worked together again.
No, they never worked together again, and in fact, it even spread to the other actors, and they all started pulling stunts on each other. James Coburn got involved, and he started hating on Steve McQueen too, because he thought he was trying to steal his limelight. It was a bunch of drama.
Wow.
And John Sturges just commented on how quickly he lost control of his cast and his film.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. But the good news is that in 1980, when Steve McQueen was dying of cancer, that's obviously not the good news, he called Yul Brynner. Okay. Yeah.
Oh.
He called Yul Brynner to thank him. And Yul said, "What for?" Steve McQueen replied, "You could have kicked me off that movie when I rattled you, but you let me stay, and that picture made me, so thanks."
Whoa.
And Brenner accepted his apology and said, "I am the king," because he was in The King and I, right? "I am the king, and you are the rebel prince, every bit as royal and dangerous to cross."
Wow.
And I was just so glad they were able to bury the hatchet before Steve died.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that McQueen went out that way. That's too bad.
Oh, speaking of smoking, he smoked like a chimney.
Did he really?
Oh, yeah.
So nuts. It's like Donald O'Connor and Singing in the Rain, 4 packs a day, but he managed to live till he was like 80 or 90. Like, it was just, it's like, what the hell? I better live that long.
Right?
Wow.
And unfortunately, Steve was only 50 when he died.
Oh, damn. Oh, wow.
Total
That's
waste.
horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cigarettes are bad, and so is vaping. Don't do it, people.
Yeah, seriously.
So, that is The Magnificent Seven. Thank you all so much for letting me talk about my dad's pick. I'm so stoked to, of course, incorporate my father into this podcast. John, I'm really happy to hear that you did appreciate and enjoy your time watching this film.
Yeah, for sure.
My father is one of my favorite people, and one of my fondest memories of growing up is every Friday night we would watch The X-Files together. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, and so I wasn't invited to people's houses on Fridays or, of course, as a teenager, parties. But my father created an activity for us, so I did have something to look forward to at the end of every school week. And while we were preparing for this episode, I was trying to think of the movies that I automatically associate with my father.
Oh, yeah.
And The Last Crusade is the number one movie I associate with my dad. And of course, I covered it in our very first Father's Day episode.
Yeah, you did.
And that is a big reason why. Of course, there's a great father-son relationship in the movie, but also that's the movie I associate with my father. Some other ones are the James Bond films. He was a big Sean Connery fan, so he introduced me to all the Sean Connery and Pierce Brosnan James Bond films because he did not think Roger Moore was any good. So I had to watch those later on in my 20s. He introduced me to Star Wars, anything with Harrison Ford, sci-fi, fantasy movies, westerns, of course.
Yeah.
Willow is another movie I definitely think of when I think of my father.
Oh.
Jason and the Argonauts, Sinbad, Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
And anything with Sigourney Weaver or Sandra Bullock. My father is a huge champion of not only women's rights, but women empowerment. So thank God he had 4 daughters. And so he loves Miss Congeniality, Legally Blonde, those wonderful female-led films. And I'm so grateful to have a father who is so supportive of strong women and raised 4 of them as well. And I called him before we started recording and wanted to ask him, well, what movies do you associate with me? He responded, well, Labyrinth and The Princess Bride.
Oh, sweet.
both movies that I've covered on this podcast. So it is not surprising, and also continues to create that connection between my father and I, and of course how much he is woven into this podcast as well. So thank you so much, Dad. I love you, and happy Father's Day, and I'm so honored to be able to dedicate this episode to you.
Sweet.
I think it's time for us to shift gears a little bit, change genres, of course, and not only decades, but millennia.
Yeah.
And discuss the film that your father chose.
Yeah, I think we can jump ahead several decades to the year of 2013 for this movie that my father chose, which I actually did have on my list because I love this movie. I will read my Facebook post from when I first saw this movie very shortly. This movie is written and directed by Richard Curtis. Vee and I have discussed our unenjoyment for Richard Curtis' film Love Actually. But this movie actually is a movie that Vee and I, and apparently now my father as well, are big fans of. This movie stars Domhnall Gleeson, Rachel McAdams, Bill Nye, Lindsay Duncan, Lydia Wilson, Tom Hollander, Margot Robbie, and Vanessa Kirby.
Yes.
Yes, this is About Time, everybody. This is a wonderful piece of cinema, a wonderful piece of comedy, time travel, love, family, and life all around. I have seen this movie a handful of times. I've owned it ever since I first watched it. It was interesting to me when I had seen the trailer, but I never really went as far as seeing this movie in theaters. I ended up DVRing this movie. DVR does still exist, but it still kind of feels like it was one of those things from back in the day, which I watched this movie on September 7th of 2014 for the very first time, and I'm just going to read you guys my Facebook post about this. A few weeks ago, I DVR'd a movie. All of you know I love my movies, and I'm sure our listeners now, 114 episodes, know I love my movies too. I DVR'd a movie called About Time starring Rachel McAdams and Domhnall Gleeson. This is absolutely one of my favorite films of all time. I watched it once, then again the next day, and again a few days later, and now have probably watched this movie close to 10 times in less than a 3-week period. It's fantastic. From the very first frame, it's a beautiful cinematography. The music is moving, including the soundtrack of some popular tunes. The performances are incredible. If you don't know the story, I'll just say our hero figures out he can travel through time, and that's all you get. I seriously recommend this film to anyone and everyone. I will admit it had me choked up a few times as well. Give it a watch this week or weekend. It's a great film for any time of day. And I had a whole handful of people comment that, yes, I was very correct on the love for this movie, because everybody that has ever seen this movie really loves this movie About Time. Now, like I said in my post, we figure out that our hero can travel through time. Tim, played by Domhnall Gleeson, his father, played by Bill Nye, tells him, and on his 21st birthday, that all of the men in their family have been able to travel through time. And Tim is very weary and thinking that this is just one sick fatherly joke. Like all fathers tell their sons, some crazy joke. My dad's running joke ever since I was a child is, hey, in the Navy, my jaw fell out, right? That's been my dad's joke since I was probably 5 years old. He's told it up until now, and I'm over 30 short from 40. So,
I don't get it, though.
I don't fucking either. That's the whole point. It's like, what do you mean your jaw fell out? It's just his thing. It's just been the joke running through the family. I think the last time I heard it was about a year ago. He said, hey, did you guys did I ever tell you in the Navy my jaw fell out? And I was like, you're still riding this fucking train? Like, can you find something else to screw around with us on? But anyway, Tim's father tells him he can travel through time, and the only way that they can travel through time, the men in the family, is to go into a dark room, clench your fists, and think of a time that you want to go back to. You can only go back in time. You cannot go forward in time. So Tim is like, this is complete horse shit. I don't believe you. But, of course, what are you going to do? If I were Tim, I absolutely would give it a shot, right? Mm-hmm. And like I mentioned, this is right after the New Year's Eve party. This is now Tim's 21st birthday. The opening of this movie, we see that Tim is a very timid, very standoffish, very insecure fellow. And New Year's Eve happens, and there's a very awkward introduction with Tim and a girl that at this New Year's Eve party. She's very much into wanting a New Year's Eve kiss, and Tim is very much like, I don't know if this is something that I should do. I think most people have kind of been in that situation. Mm-hmm. So at New Year, he shakes her hand and says Happy New Year. She's very upset about it. Next day, he learns about this whole time travel possibility, and he decides to go back to that moment when he shakes this young girl's hand. And instead of shaking her hand, he actually kisses her. And I will never forget the moment that the fireworks went off for me when watching this movie was when he goes back and kisses this girl. Because I've been there. Been there in the past. Been like, Happy New Year, yeah, and turn around and go get another beer or go get, another shot or whatever. Because you're just like, is this like going to be a good idea? So after this, Tim then goes back into the closet, goes back to present time, starts talking to his father about how this is something that actually very clearly is able to be accomplished by being a man in this family. And his father starts telling him about how it would be a very good idea to use this as, well, you know what, just listen to this.
Any first thoughts?
Well, I suppose apart from getting a slightly better haircut.
Yeah.
Money would be the obvious thing.
Very mixed blessing. Utterly screwed up your grandfather's life, left him without love or friends. I've never bumped into a genuinely happy rich person.
It would be nice not to have to work.
No, that's a real recipe for disaster. Look what happened to Uncle Fred.
What happened to Uncle Fred?
Absolutely sort of wasted his life. You have to use it for things that you really think will make your life the way you want it to be. Come on, really think about this.
Well, to be honest, I suppose for the moment, it would be just great if it could help me get a girlfriend.
Wow. Massive.
So after all of that with his father, and I think it's hilarious because, you, as I'm not a father, but, every father wants their son to accomplish something big, right, with the time that they have. And Tim is like, I would really like a girlfriend. And his dad's just like, wow. Okay. Well, great, son. Yeah, let's do.
Color me disappointed.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's Bill Nye. So
Oh my God, I love him so much.
Before we get too much into it, this movie, and I know we've said it about so many other movies and picks of ours, the cast in this movie there's nobody
Top
else
notch.
that could be anybody
No.
else in this movie. Everybody brings it. Domhnall Gleeson is perfect as Tim. Bill Nye as his father. Lindsay Duncan as his mother. Lydia Wilson as his sister Kit Kat. She's just so adorable, but you could tell that she's the black sheep, and she kind of brings that up later on in the movie. But after all of this, we are introduced to Kit Kat's boyfriend's cousin, who's played by Margot Robbie. And this was actually the first time I had ever seen Margot Robbie when I first watched the movie, because Wolf of Wall Street hadn't yet come out. And I remember just thinking like, whoa, who is this? And of course, we all know Margot Robbie is absolutely stunning. And I love the voiceover of Tim when he's trying to pretty much kind of figure things out. He starts talking about Charlotte, who Margot Robbie plays. And I think it's really hilarious that he tries to utilize this new gift of his to try and win Charlotte over. And, it unfortunately doesn't work out for the best for him. It kind of blows up in his face in one way or another. And another cool thing about this movie is that not only does Tim obviously know that he can travel through time, his father knows that he can travel through time. So there are a lot of cuts to Bill Nye's character, who is quote-unquote dad. He doesn't actually have a true name in this movie, where he is literally starting to understand that Tim is going back in time and trying to start things over again. And I really liked that whole father-son, I know what you're trying to do. Fast forward to Charlotte now not being in the picture. Tim goes out with his friend, who he calls Dodgy J, and they go to a restaurant that, very similarly to one of my very early picks of our Guilty Pleasure episode in When in Rome, when they go to a restaurant that's all in the dark and you just have to feel your way through, smell your way through.
Dumb.
I think it's kind of cool. But Tim and Jay go into this restaurant, and they are seated at a table, and they start chatting with these two women. And one of them happens to be Vanessa Kirby and Rachel McAdams. And they don't know what they look like until they get outside, and Jay and Vanessa Kirby's character kind of walk off and have a very comical little bit of interaction. And Rachel McAdams comes out, and Tim immediately is just completely enthralled with Mary. And he also says that Mary is his mother's name, which in true sense I find a little bit strange. We all love our mothers, but I don't think I could ever be like, oh, that's my mother's name. My mother's name's Terry, and be like falling in love with a woman named Terry. That would just be a little bit weird.
Yeah, I agree with you. And given the negative reaction I've received from parents when they introduce me to their kids, and then they say, oh, my daughter's name is Kaya, and I always retort with, oh, that's my dog's name. And how many parents are so butthurt when I say that and so unimpressed.
That's your dog's name?
Yeah,
That's hysterical.
dating someone with the same name as one of your parents is just would be too no.
Or a sibling even. Yeah, it's
No,
very
no,
strange. It's very strange.
You don't want that cross association ever.
No. But again, that's a very minimal thing in this movie.
No, but it's
So-
a great joke, and I love that he has to rewind things in order to try to fix it, because that is literally the worst way to introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. And after Tim and Mary end up meeting, they have a very sweet rest of the evening together. And things start to progress, but Tim also decides that he's going to try and help other people out in his life and go back in time and switch things around. And when he does that, very unfortunately, he has to reignite this thing with Mary that he had previously that only he remembers because Mary does not. And that's what his father explains. Very similar to Back to the Future. You know,
Butterfly
if
effect?
you go back in time and you change anything, it's going to kind of fuck things up. And it's very well done in this movie. There's really no special effects in this movie. It's pretty much a heartbeat going into a dark place. They cut to the fists being clenched, and then his clothes have changed, and now he's able to restart where he left off in a previous moment in his life. And for the rest of the movie, Tim is trying to navigate through this newfound superpower of his and try to not break his own heart, basically.
And break his life.
And yeah, completely destroy his life. And again, I have loved this movie since I first watched it in 2014. After I had seen it, I think for the 5th time, I realized, like, you know what? My parents, I think, would enjoy this movie. There's not a whole lot of harsh dialogue. There's no sex scenes in this movie. There's no nudity. It is R-rated because fuck is used a couple of times. And there's a little bit of sexual innuendo here and there, but there's nothing like overly graphic, nothing
they
that
cut
would
to
make
them in
anybody
bed.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
And
I remember
that
texting my
scene though. That scene though, after their first time, and he's like, "Well, that was just awkward."
Oh yeah.
So he goes back to try to be better.
That
my
is
God.
that is one of my favorite sequences. Yeah, because she goes, "Oh, don't worry about it," and he goes, "Can you just give me a sec?" And then he comes, he comes back like 2 more times, and I love it. He's just there finally on the floor. And he's like, "That was the greatest night of my entire life." And she goes, "1 time is good enough for my perfect guy," and he's like, "Well, that's not entirely fair," because of course he knows he's been back 3 times, but she has no idea. So there's a lot of really great comedy and a lot of that's what I would do situations as a human being if you had the ability to go back in time and change things, especially with being with, the woman that you're falling in love with or the man that you're falling in love with. Sometimes it's not always going to be great the first time, but you want to make it great for, it's complete humanity, right? Like it's 100%.
Perfect descriptor. Perfect descriptor of this movie.
Completely human. And like I said, I will always remember when I texted my dad and my mom simultaneously about this movie. It's like, I just watched a movie called About Time. It's R-rated, but I think you guys would really enjoy it. And several weeks later, I got a text message from my dad saying, "Your mom and I watched a very sweet movie the other night called About Time." And I was like, "Yeah, I suggested it to you." He goes, "Yeah, I know, but I just wanted to let you know we watched it and we absolutely loved it. And my father picked it for this episode." So I'm very, very happy that not only could I introduce my parents to a fantastic film, but an R-rated film at that. Beyond the love story, the family story between father and son, amazing. Absolutely
Incredible.
phenomenal. And Bill Nye's character reminds me of my dad in this movie because my dad has been an avid reader since I can remember. And my dad has always wanted me to be a reader since as far back as I can remember. I remember I was like out of my first year of junior high, and my dad's like, "You know what you're going to do this summer, right? You're going to be reading a lot of books." And I was like, "Fuck that. I'm going to be playing PlayStation and watching Rocko's Modern Life. I don't know what you're talking about." So I read a book or 2, I think, and here and there. And now I'm reading like 13 to 20 books a year now because I'm a big fan of reading. But I love that moment when Tim asks his dad what he's done with his time.
What have you done with it?
For me, it's books. I've read everything a man could wish to. Twice. Dickens 3 times.
I want his house.
Oh,
this
yeah.
idyllic English countryside house with all of the books piled everywhere. Oh, absolutely gorgeous. And
what a way to like incorporate the fact that he has gone back in time so much, right?
Yeah, and
It's just like he has these stacks.
little tidbits. Yes, those little, as we've always said, little details make a movie great. Who'd have thought, though, that something marketed as it was marketed as a romantic comedy when it came out?
Absolutely, yeah.
This slight fantasy romantic film, and who'd have thought that the relationship between these two men, Tim and his dad, would almost overshadow the romantic story in this movie? I am so drawn to and cherish the relationship they developed and showed in this movie of him and his dad, even more so than the love story. And that's what I always remember and come back to whenever I watch this film, and it's so heartwarming. It gets me every single time.
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. I will admit, I was very stoned when I watched this the first time, but there's a moment in this movie that I just I got super blubbery during the first time I watched it. And then, like I said in my Facebook post, I watched it like 10 times over the course of like a month.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was one of those movies I craved to watch because of, like you said, the relationship between Tim and his father, the relationship that he builds between Mary throughout the entire thing, his friendship with Dodgy J, his friendship with Tom Hollander. I love the introduction to Tom Hollander. I think it is absolutely hysterical. I love the whole moment. He's like, "Does your mother still look like Andy Warhol?" And he's like, "What?" Like, and he's like, "I never really liked your dad, actually." And of course, he's just some depressed playwright that can't think of a good idea. And the supporting cast is amazing. Lindsay Duncan, we mentioned her many episodes ago when we did our Emma Stone Oscars episode for Birdman. She plays the critic in Birdman, or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance with Michael Keaton and Emma Stone. And Bill Nye, we've mentioned...
last week.
We mentioned last week. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, absolutely. Pirates of the Caribbean, Shaun of the Dead. He's also in just a handful of other movies. He was also in Pirate Radio, which was written by Richard Curtis. I don't know if you ever saw Pirate Radio, but that was actually based on a true story about a bunch of DJs that decided to go out into international waters and play rock and roll music when it was being banned in the UK.
I loved that trailer.
Fucking awesome. I worked on that trailer, actually.
I loved that trailer. This movie came out almost 20 years ago now, and and I still remember that trailer. It's such a good trailer. I'm so stoked you worked on it. Fantastic work. I actually never saw the movie, but I still remember that trailer because it was so damn good.
The movie's good, but they show you pretty much the movie in the trailer. It was one of those things that I did not watch the movie until like 2 or 3 years after it came out. Because I worked on the trailer, seen the fucking movie,
exactly,
but not really. It's a very Nick Frost is in it from Shaun of the Dead.
Oh
and
my
Hot
gosh,
Fuzz.
That's right.
Like it's a good flick. I highly recommend. I think and John Rhys-Ifans is in the movie. It's definitely worth a watch. It's a cool story. The fact that it's based on a true story also. And Domhnall Gleeson. I know I don't get into a whole lot of actors' past credits, but most recently he was in the last few Star Wars movies. He was in Rise of Skywalker. He was in The Last Jedi. He was in Ex Machina, which I absolutely am a major fan of. Alex Garland wrote and directed. Oscar Isaac is in that movie. He's also one of the Weasley brothers in the entirety of the Harry Potter series.
He's Bill, the one who gets scratched by Greyback the werewolf, actually.
Oh, okay. I don't remember that part, but cool.
And I loved the turn for both Bill Nighy and Domhnall Gleeson in this film because neither of them are playing villains.
No, yeah.
And
not
of course,
at all.
with Pirates, you think of Bill Nighy and he's Davy Jones, and then with Domhnall Gleeson being General Hux or something. I forget his name exactly in the new Star Wars movies, but he's that asshole on the Empire side. Or
he was good.
Bad guy
I liked
side.
him in The Last Jedi, but I'll be honest, I didn't like his turn in Return of.
No, that was.
I didn't like
ass.
his turn in Rise of Skywalker.
No, not his fault at all. But
not his fault at all. No, not his fault.
Have you seen The Patient?
I have not seen The Patient. That's actually been on my to-watch list for a while. I will watch anything with Domhnall Gleeson.
Yeah.
I am a major fan. He's Brendan Gleeson's son, who Brendan Gleeson is Frank in 28 Days Later, and also Mad-Eye Moody in the Harry Potter series.
Haymitch in Braveheart?
Yeah, fuck yeah, absolutely. And we've mentioned before, this movie is stacked with phenomenal actors. Tom Hollander, we mentioned Lord Beckett last week when he came in as Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice. We also have Rachel McAdams, who was great. She was in Wedding Crashers, Red Eye, Mean Girls, Eurovision, which if you've ever seen Eurovision with Will Ferrell, very entertaining movie. It is Netflix produced, but I enjoyed it. She's also in one of the greatest Woody Allen movies, Midnight in Paris. I've never seen Rachel McAdams like that before, and she was just such a fucking bitch, but she was so fantastic. It might be on the podcast because V, you and I have had that discussion of disassociating art from the person. So, it might show up. But again, another Easter egg in this movie, Richard E. Grant shows up, which is awesome. And if for those of you that don't know who Richard E. Grant is, he plays the somewhat manager to the Spice Girls in Spice World. He is also in Can You Ever Forgive Me with Melissa McCarthy. He was in Hudson Hawk. He was also in most recently in Saltburn, and he was in Argyle as well. I know, V, you saw Argyle. He was Dr. Fowler. Yeah, just a great character actor. He's been in a whole bunch of things. He was also in The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, and The Rise of Skywalker as General Pride.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So this movie is full of a lot of people. Richard Griffiths also is in this movie. He is an actor with 92 acting credits. He was in Sleepy Hollow, Gandhi, Pirates of the Caribbean, On Stranger Tides, all of the Harry Potter films as Harry Potter's dipshit uncle. And he's in one of my favorite Martin Scorsese films that will be on this podcast, Hugo, which is one of my most favorite Martin Scorsese films of all time. So yeah, this movie is just stacked with a lot of great actors, and oddly enough, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm so glad they went the route that they did, and I'm glad scheduling conflicts played a part in this, because the original actress that was cast as Mary was Zooey Deschanel.
No.
I love Zooey Deschanel. I've worked with her on New Girl. She's awesome. Love her in Yes Man, love her in 500 Days of Summer, and New Girl. This would not have sold if it was Zooey Deschanel. I just don't feel like it would have had the same impact.
She's too quirky for the character of Mary, who is...
Exactly.
Has an edge to her and is straight-laced.
Yeah. I thought Rachel McAdams was a perfect casting.
Oh, God, yes. Watch this instead of The Notebook.
I've never seen The Notebook, and I am a Gosling fan these days. But yeah, it's still a movie that I just have not made my way towards.
Nope. Toxic relationship. No need to watch it.
All right. Well, then I just won't do that. The restaurant that Tim and Mary do meet in, albeit in the dark, and meet outside of, actually is a real restaurant. It is at 69 73rd John Street, London, and that whole sequence is inspired by a real event in Richard Curtis's life.
Stupid. I would never do that.
I think you need to have a little bit more of an open mind.
I don't think that defines the openness of my mind. I just... it's what these tech yuppies would do in San Francisco, and that's why it's it's stupid.
Fine, I can understand that. But again, if you think about it, this
and I could say that because I was a tech yuck.
You were, yes, and you still are a bit of a techie.
Yes, I am,
but not in San Francisco
or
anymore.
A yuppie. No,
I don't know though. It's weird. Like there was a news story years ago that came out. Like speed dating and all these kind of weird things, and I could see this as like midnight dating, right? You go in there and it's like completely dark. And the cool thing about that restaurant, though, beyond the idea that I think is cool, is all of the waiters are actually blind. So that guy that leads them into the restaurant is actually legally blind.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
which is pretty interesting.
I can tell you it was a much better episode of CSI.
All right. But again, going back to the dating thing real quick before we get back into the movie, there was a study and a dating idea where they had men and women wear a shirt for like 3 days and then put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in their freezer and then take it to this dating event and then have people smell their pheromones and stuff like that. And whoever's they thought was great, they tried to match them with. It's just so fascinating. It's like...
just use Tinder.
I am kind of grateful that I've actually never been on Tinder.
Right?
Yes. This movie was a massive hit in South Korea, which blew everybody away when it first came out.
Okay.
It didn't do so well in the United States. We'll get into the numbers in just a few minutes, but I was kind of surprised to see South Korea as this being one of the biggest movies that South Korea had in theaters at the time.
Yes, it is a bit of a random country given, I would think it would be a European country with Domhnall Gleeson and Bill Nighy.
Right.
Like maybe it was bigger in Europe than in the US, but very cool that somebody somewhere thought it was an awesome movie and made it very popular.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Margot Robbie and Domhnall Gleeson have worked together 2 other times on top of this movie. One movie that I have mentioned in the past when you and I were discussing Trainspotting with Kelly MacDonald, there's a movie out there called Goodbye Christopher Robin, and Margot Robbie and Domhnall Gleeson play a married couple in that movie that actually give birth to Christopher Robin.
Oh.
And I'm going to tell you right now, that movie is awesome. That movie is perfect for any parental figure that wants to try and throw their children into the entertainment industry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it completely shows it for what it is. And it was a great movie, and I thought Margot Robbie was amazing. There's a moment between her and Kelly MacDonald that I will never forget. I stood up and cheered during, and yeah, great movie. They also worked together later on in the movie Peter Rabbit, which I am not a big fan of. Amy likes Peter Rabbit. I'm not a big fan of Peter Rabbit.
James Coburn the voice of Peter?
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm not a big fan of Peter Rabbit. Yeah. This film, About Time, takes place over the course of 8 years.
Wow. Oh, yeah, that makes sense, actually. Duh, of course.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And, as you watch it, the makeup works, the hairstyles change, and clothing changes, and all that kind of stuff. So I really like the incorporation of time used there, and not just for the sake of going back into time.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we've been talking about this movie a lot, and V, you've agreed with me on a lot of these pinpoints and story arcs and characters and actors and everything. But I'm curious, I don't know how many times you've seen this movie, if you've seen it more than me or less than me, but what did you think about it this time around?
I absolutely love this film. It makes me cry every single time I watch it. I've only seen it, I think, 4 times now with this last week's viewing. And it was on my list for years and years and years. And I knew it was a great rom-com, but I don't often watch rom-coms. I love them. But similar to Westerns with you, it's not a genre I think of on a Saturday night when I'm going to watch a movie, right? And so it takes some purposeful decisions for me to pick a rom-com for when I'm going to sit down and watch a film. That being said, I absolutely love rom-coms, and I love this film. I had not watched it until after COVID, so I've only seen this in the last couple of years. That's how long I needed to watch it and that it was on my list. And finally when I did, because it went on Netflix, and that's when I watched it the first time. And I immediately fell in love with this film. You're right. The casting really draws you in, and you just love every single one of these characters. A film making you cry is extremely satisfying for me personally, and I know for you as well, because that means it really got you and it did its job, right? And so I'm happy that I cry every time, even though I cry every single time. And so, like I said, I've watched it probably 4 times now. I highly recommend this film. I love that you picked it, and then your dad suggested it for this episode. And unlike my film, it does have a wonderful story of a father-son relationship, which is great. And so it certainly fits in with the theme of this week as well. And I'm just so happy to be able to discuss it with you on the show.
As am I, yeah. Very grateful that my dad chose this one. He had a list of a couple other movies, and one of them I almost went with because of the story behind why he was choosing it.
Oh.
And yeah, the only reason why I didn't choose it is because I hadn't seen the movie yet, and I wasn't sure if I was going to like it.
Right.
So I didn't want to do a movie that I might not have enjoyed. I'm still going to watch the movie because it was a suggestion, but
you just shit on the movie in the episode. Happy Father's Day.
Yeah, right. That just would have been terrible. So when About Time was one of his other choices, similar to my mom's choice for Defending Your Life, I was like, well, geez, this is perfect because I love both of those movies. And About Time, like you said, makes me cry every time. But yeah, it's just a great human piece and perfect for Father's Day. And beyond the acting, the cinematography, the editing, the comedy, the soundtrack to this movie is top-notch. Like, I love the Ben Folds song, I'm the Luckiest, which is just, I cannot tell you how many times I've listened to that song. There's a song called Il Mondo that is used during a wedding sequence in this movie, and I love how it's introduced, not only just for that sequence, but the dialogue before it really sets it up perfectly. You feel every emotion when watching this movie. You feel love, you feel happiness, you feel anger, you feel sadness. And, that is exactly why you and I, V, love movies.
Yeah.
Is because it brings out the emotions. And this is one of those movies that does it to me every time, and apparently also to you.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, That's pretty much all I've got. I'll get into the budget and the releases. And before we do that, though, I do, like V, you mentioned a lot of the movies that reminds you of times with you and your father. I will list off many of the movies that my dad and I had either first seen together or my dad introduced me to as a young child. Now, my dad and I have been going to the movies for the last over 30, short from 40 years, and some of the earlier ones that I remember are Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. My dad used to write movie reviews for a local newspaper when I was very young, and he would get passes to the El Capitan, so of course we'd go to the El Capitan Theater on Hollywood Boulevard and see these movies, which was Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, I believe Lion King was another one, and Little Mermaid. So we saw, the four core 1989 to early 1990s movies.
Good job, Dad.
Yeah, right? On top of that, my dad took me to my very first viewing of Jurassic Park when I was 7 years old. He actually took me out of school early to see an early afternoon showing of Jurassic Park. I looked away when Dennis Nedry got killed because it was scaring me so much, but other than that, I watched the entire movie.
That dinosaur was scary.
Oh, hell yeah. Dilophosaurus always kind of still freaks me out.
Mm-hmm, same.
My dad also took me to see a Goofy movie for the first time with my sister and two friends of ours from church. So I don't think my dad is a big fan of a Goofy movie, but a Goofy movie will be coming up on the podcast very soon because that is one of my favorite films of all time.
And I've never seen it, so I can't wait for you to introduce me to it.
I know, it's so crazy you've never seen it. My dad also introduced me to Alien, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner, and Grosse Point Blank, which was also a pick of mine many episodes ago. I introduced my father to Sin City, Cloud Atlas, A Very Long Engagement, Collateral. I introduced my dad very recently to Starship Troopers, which was a great moment because my dad ended up really enjoying the movie. My father and my mother also took me to see Men in Black for the first time, which I saw many times in theaters. And Independence Day, of course, early 1990s. Had to get those ones in.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad took me to my very first R-rated movie in the theaters, which was Denzel Washington in The Hurricane.
Awesome. That's a good first R-rated film.
Oh, absolutely. And we've been going to movies ever since. Actually, another one that my dad introduced me to that I wanted to see as a kid, and my dad was super surprised I wanted to see, was Brad Pitt in 7 Years in Tibet, which if anybody's ever seen that movie, that is a crazy-ass movie. But it's a wonderful movie, even though Brad Pitt does not know how to do accents.
Bad accent movie. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. But a great movie nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this movie, About Time, had a UK release on September 4th of 2013, and the wide US release was November 8th of 2013. About Time had a budget of $12 million. Domestically, it brought in $15.3 million.
Okay.
And worldwide brought in $87.1 million.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, did pretty good. So congratulations to everybody involved, including Richard Curtis, even though I do not like Love Actually.
Right. Same.
A few other movies that Richard Curtis actually wrote, these actually kind of surprised me. Beyond Pirate Radio, he wrote Yesterday, directed by Danny Boyle. Yeah, it was okay. He also wrote Mamma Mia 2, which I don't have any idea how he did that.
No. Mm-mm.
He also wrote the Steven Spielberg-directed War Horse, which is a fantastic film.
Yes, and I think it's going to be a movie for one of our World War I episodes.
It is one of my picks for a World War I episode coming up very soon.
Great.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, this movie came out in the year 2013, so we'll get into a little bit of the box office for the year 2013.
The year my very first ever movie pick for this podcast came out.
Ah, well, maybe it'll show up in the top grossing films of 2013. Because the highest grossing film of 2013 was Disney animated's Frozen.
Of course.
The second highest grossing film of 2013, Iron Man 3.
You like it, I don't.
Yeah, I enjoyed it the last time I watched it, which was very recently. The fourth highest grossing film, The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug.
Boo.
Never saw it. The fifth highest grossing film, Hunger Games, Catching Fire. Never saw that one either.
Oh, that's a great movie.
Oh, interesting. The sixth highest grossing film, appropriately, Fast and the Furious 6.
Oh my God.
I thought that was kind of funny how that worked out.
It is.
Seventh highest grossing film of 2013, Monsters University, which you apparently have sworn to never see.
That's correct.
Which is unfortunate because it's very entertaining. The eighth highest grossing film, George Clooney, but mostly Sandra Bullock, in Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity, which is one of my favorite films in space ever made.
And then they play siblings in Ocean's 8.
That's right. Yes, they do. The ninth highest grossing film, one of the worst movies I've ever seen about a superhero, starring Henry Cavill, Man of Steel.
That is a really good description.
Thank you. The 10th highest grossing film, one of my favorite Thor films, the sequel to Thor, The Dark World.
That's just because Christopher Eccleston's in it.
Probably, but I do think it's a pretty badass movie.
Mm-hmm.
The 13th highest grossing film, James Franco and Mia Kunis in Oz the Great and Powerful. The 14th highest grossing film, Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yes. God, that movie's underrated.
Great movie. So damn good. 16th highest grossing film, a movie that I just recently watched again because I love it. It is awesome. It's got Charlie Hunnam, directed and written by Guillermo del Toro, Pacific Rim.
Yes.
Such a great monster movie.
Mm-hmm.
The 17th highest grossing film, Martin Scorsese, directed, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Jonah Hill, Wolf of Wall Street. I love that movie. The 23rd highest grossing film, one of my most favorite, scariest films of all time that I've ever seen. V, I introduced it to you last year and you texted me, why the fuck did you make me watch that movie? Starring Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson.
I believe my exact words were, fuck you for making me watch this movie.
Those were the words. I got them mixed up. I got them all tangled because The Conjuring is definitely one of the scariest films I've ever seen and ever made.
It is absolutely the scariest movie I ever saw. I made sure to travel and watch it with my sister because I would not watch it by myself. But it is one of my all-time favorite horror films. I love that film. I will watch it again, even though it scared the ever-loving shit out of me, and at one point will probably give me a heart attack. But if one of the weekends that I'm over at your house in like October or during the fall, and you turn to me and you go, let's watch The Conjuring, I will not say no.
Oh, wonderful. I love to hear it.
Yeah. Oh, such a good film. I'm so glad you introduced me to it, even though it scared the shit out of me.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. 25th highest grossing film of 2013, Tom Cruise and Morgan Freeman in Oblivion.
Oh my God. Talk about amazing scores. It is on my list and a future pick.
Perfect. 32nd highest grossing film, American Hustle, which I was a very big fan of.
Yeah, it's weird how it's a forgettable movie. Like, I do not remember anything except the microwave scene happening in that film.
I know, right?
But it's a really good movie.
It is. It's a damn good flick. 37th highest grossing film, Tom Hanks in Captain Phillips, which is a great movie.
Yeah.
43rd highest grossing film, V, your very first pick for Movies You Missed podcast with The Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Yes.
47th highest grossing film, Morgan Freeman and Gerard Butler in Olympus Has Fallen.
That's a good movie.
Damn good movie indeed. 49th highest grossing film, Insidious Chapter 2, which is scary as hell and also fantastic with Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne.
Oh, I love her.
So do I. 52nd highest grossing film, Mark Wahlberg starring Lone Survivor, an absolutely heartbreaking yet inspirational piece of war cinema.
It's so good. Directed by Peter Berg, right?
Yes, Peter Berg.
God, that's a good film.
So good. The 61st highest grossing film, a movie that we discussed very briefly in our episode from 2 weeks ago when we discussed the Sherman Brothers starring Tom Hanks and Emma Thompson in Saving Mr. Banks.
Really good trailer.
Very good. Great movie, too. 63rd highest grossing film, V, one of your picks from many episodes ago, starring Terrence Howard, Paul Dano, and Hugh Jackman in Prisoners.
Oh, yes.
Yes. 66th highest grossing film, Josh Brolin, Sean Penn, Ryan Gosling, and Emma Stone in Gangster Squad.
I just rewatched that movie last month. God, it's
awesome.
A badass film. I don't know why everybody shit on it when it came out.
I don't either, but it's awesome.
It's so good.
The 74th highest grossing film, Ron Howard directed, Chris Hemsworth and Daniel Bruhl starring in Rush.
Yes, one of my earlier picks.
Such a great movie.
So glad you love that film because...
Me too.
I was so excited to introduce it to you, and then because you loved it, I ended up giving you a DVD.
Hell yeah. I love that. It was the Blu-ray, actually.
Yes, and I'm always so tickled to be able to add a movie to your collection.
As am I. And the 80s first highest grossing film of 2013 coming in this week with my father's pick of About Time.
Top 100.
Top 100.
Fantastic.
Yes. So that is About Time, everybody. If you care to check it out, if you have not yet, you can stream it on Peacock or watch your physical copy like I did. I've owned this movie since 2014. If you haven't seen it, please give it a shot because you will also love it. So thank you, Dad, for picking this movie. Thank you for always introducing me to movies that I hadn't seen or have always wanted to see. and experiencing my first watches of those movies with you. So I'm looking forward to many more of those in the next several years. And thank you for being a supporter of Movies You Miss podcast. So that is our Father's Day episode, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our fathers for suggesting these films to be featured on this episode. If you haven't seen these movies, like Vee and I have said, please do check them out. They are well worth your time. And happy Father's Day to all of your cinema fathers and father figures.
Yes, thank you, Dad.
Yeah, so Vee, I know you've watched this movie with your father, but would you watch The Magnificent Seven with your grandmother?
Well, since it's our Father's Day episode, I will pick my father's mother, so my paternal grandmother, for this question. She was a big Western fan as well, so absolutely.
Nice.
And John, would you watch About Time with your grandmother?
Well, similar to you, I will go with my father's mother, and unfortunately, my father's mother died in the early 90s, so I never really got to know a whole lot about her cinematic taste.
Aw,
but I
bummer.
feel like she would have enjoyed this movie, so I would say yes.
Good.
Yeah. So next week, V. Oh, this is going to be a fun one because I haven't seen your pick in, 2 decades or more.
Oh, my God.
I have a Blu-ray copy of my pick, so I've watched it recently.
Because it's that good.
Yeah. So, V, do you want to fill everybody in on what your pick for next week is?
Sure, I would be more than happy to. And since we are diving right into summer, and we decided to do some peak 90s summer blockbuster action films.
Oh, yeah.
And what else could I pick but the Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock starring Speed?
Wonderful.
And if you have a Starz subscription, you can stream it for free.
Perfect. That's where I will watch it.
And John, which 90s summer blockbuster did you pick?
Oh, I picked a fantastic one
Yes, you
starring
did.
Sean Connery, Ed Harris, and Nicolas Cage, directed by Michael Bay. This is The Rock. And you can watch it on Hulu. If you have a Hulu subscription, I will watch my Blu-ray copy.
Perfect.
I can't wait.
Me
I love this
either.
movie so much.
Me too.
So great.
That's going to be a
Awesome.
fun one.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be so much fun. So thank you guys again for joining us for this Father's Day episode. Please do rate, review, subscribe. It helps us out so much. Please do send us any recommendations that you have so we can do an Audible if it ever comes to it, like we have in the past. We haven't done a whole lot of them, but it's always fun to kind of change things up. And as always, here at Movies You Miss Podcast, we like to shut down with film is a form of art, and in art all opinions are valid, except if you think
it was at all, in any way, shape, or form, in any reality or dimension, acceptable for Variety to choose Kim Kardashian for one of their Actors on Actors interviews.
Oh, yes, absolutely. What a complete horseshit movie.
Crock of shit that was.
Yeah, that was, oh my God.
Appearing in a sex tape that your mother published does not equate you to being an actor.
Nope, it does not. And neither does being in several episodes of a show that should have ended after the second season.
Yes, totally agree with that too.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. We'll see you guys next week. Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye.